Toshin Ayin Vav, 10 years from now, and bemoan the fact, indeed, that our children, in addition to having Christmas trees in their homes, which is an issue, will have lost any meaningful approach to being Jewish other than the fact that they wear tcheles. Thanks very much.
As usual, we'll take questions. There is one question which was asked by one of our invitees who couldn't come, which I forwarded to you, and I also mentioned one question on the phone to you, which I would like to take first. And in the meantime, you can put up your hand, and I have Victor Geller, with Yosef Atina, Chaim Zohar, Professor Shmuel Sandler. Yosef Atina I have, Chaim Zohar, Professor Shmuel Sandler, Hannah Giron. That's so far. David Leshnik, who is not here, sent you an email. He himself was held with 100 other people in the Bnei Brit building in Washington.
Oh, yeah, right.
As a hostage by blacks of the Hanafi movement, and it was a terrible experience, and he has asked you to relate to that, and I asked you at the time in the second question to relate to the case study of the blacks driving out the Jews from a certain quarter in Boston.
Oh, yeah, the neighborhood conflicts, right?
The neighborhood conflicts.
Yeah, there were many conflicts.
The neighborhood conflicts in Boston. So perhaps you would like to address those questions first, and then we will go through.
Yes, the business with the Hanafi was to minimize the event itself. It was awful, and certainly can't minimize the pain that was experienced by those who were involved in that those who were held hostage, I don't know, for a couple of days or however long it was. This was Hamola's Gibein. This was quite a while ago, and I think that's the point.
When was this?
It was at least 20 years, probably no more. It was in mid-1970s, I think. It was late 1970s, I think it was. It was almost 30 years ago. And look, this was a group of radical black Muslims, and I don't know anything about the theology, the Hanafi sect. I don't know anything about them, but there's black Muslims in the United States, and at the time they were very radical. Now there's a split between the black Muslims. There's the mainstream black Muslims who are actually just fine toward Jews and indeed supporters of Israel, believe it or not. And then there's, of course, the Farhan group, which is radical, anti-Semitic, and so on and so forth. Now, when I look at events such as this, then and now, so and clearly there are awful events, there are awful people out there. The question is, what is the impact? And the answer is, the impact is minimal. Even indeed, what was the impact then of this group? This was a terrible event. I mean, Jews in the Bnei Brit building in Washington were held hostage for some time, and it was very traumatic. And as I say, you can't minimize the event itself. The impact was zero in terms of anti-Semitism in general in the United States, of the conditions of Jewish security in the United States. And indeed, this was one of the examples in which black leadership itself got up and repudiated the actions of these crazies. They were appalled because they felt, rightly so, I'm a black leader. What these guys are doing is forget the being a nice guy again. In terms of my own self-interest, these guys are doing things that are going to harm my coalitional activities on affirmative action, on this and that. So the black leaders themselves did the right thing at the time, and they repudiated the event and condemned it, and so on and so forth. And there was very little of an impact. There was no impact at all, as awful as the event was. By the way, that's the mashal. The nimshal is the question of acts of anti-Semitic vandalism in general. You know, the ADL has this count of audit of anti-Semitic acts every year, and they count up 1,000, 1,500, you know, and so, and it's important to put this in perspective. The individual who's at the receiving end of an act of anti-Semitic vandalism is an individual who's been abused. It's a terrible thing, but you have to look at, you know, gee, there's 1,000 events that are counted up in a population of 250 million people. This suggests something to me, and beyond the event itself, there is very little of an impact in terms of, and I go back to what I said earlier, the fundamental security of Jews in America in 2005. The context is important. I'm talking about Jewish security in 2005 in America. I'm not talking about 2005 in Europe. I'm not talking about 1935 in America. So the fundamental security, whatever is going out there in terms of anti-Semitism, is basically secure. Now, the question of the neighborhoods, clearly in the 1960s, this is a very large issue, and I'm not going to offer an analysis at all. I'll just make the observation that in the 1960s, there was one of the most important generators of urban tension in general, and black-Jewish tensions specifically, was the fact of changing neighborhoods. The obverse side of the coin of the black improvement in social and economic status was that they began moving in certain neighborhoods, and there were clearly some tensions between Jews. I think it's a little bit disingenuous, with all respect to the questioner, to say that the blacks drove out the Jews. It's not clear to me that that's an accurate representation, but let's say that they did for the moment. There were very large tensions in many neighborhoods, and the worst, of course, was what was going on in the school system in New York, the Ocean Hill, Brownsville section, where there clearly was anti-Semitism on the part of the black teachers. And those were very real. There's no question about it. Ultimately, they were resolved. There was a new equilibrium that was developed, and so on. But he's right. There were very serious tensions in the 1960s in many neighborhoods around the country. Boston and New York are the classic cases.
We'll take 3 questions together, because otherwise we have already for 3 rounds. So first is Victor Geller, then Yusuf Hakimian.
Wouldn't it be correct to say that among the important factors, both in the black and the Jewish community, was the experience of World War II? Because the Jews who were fearful beforehand and said nothing except for Stephen Wise, who filled Madison Square Garden, and was objected to by many Jewish leaders, from the Zayin Shah. 500,000 Jews served in the American military in World War II. They met Goyim for the first time, and more important, millions of non-Jews got to know a Jewish fellow serviceman. And the Jews who came out and then went to colleges they could not get into under the GI Bill, and were able to get more college education, profession, and so forth, that this generation was substantially different from the Jews before the war. In contrast, the black soldiers who served in the military served in a subservient position in all black units. Very few were allowed to be combat troops, and they became aware when they came home about the other blacks who served in industry, and they began to become more aggressive in terms of the rights that they did not have.
Yosef?
Let me respond.
No, let's, because otherwise we have 8 questions already.
This is a quickie. Quick response. First of all, Victor, congratulations on your new book. It's terrific. Second, anytime that anybody begins a question with, wouldn't it be correct to say, my inclination is to disagree with the question, with the analysis. In this case, however, I want to say that I agree 100% with Mr. Geller's analysis. He's entirely on the mark. That the experience of World War II with respect to both Jewish communities and black communities had exactly the effect that you said. No question about it.
Okay, we'll take 3 questions then in the next. Yusuf Hakimian, after him, Chaim Zohar.
Okay. I think that during the civil rights movement, which I was a college student in America at that time, for the Jews to have supported the civil rights movement was a noble cause, and I think it was admirable. And I really, even if the leader, if that was to repeat itself, even if the leader was Louis Farrakhan, I would still support that movement at that time under those conditions. But after that, unfortunately, in my view, and by the way, just a side point that I think is important, I served as a member of National Urban League. For those who don't know, it's a black organization. And I think that it basically has been one way, and there has been no payback on the part of the leadership of American black Jewish community to those things that are important to American Jewish community, whatever the issues are, and two of them that are worth mentioning. One of them is the question of the Soviet Jews, and the other one is the question of the State of Israel. Even today, and I would bet anyone who wants to, I haven't looked at the list, so it's a blind bet on my part. Just about a week ago, the Congress of the United States passed a resolution condemning the remarks of Iranian president by 370 to 49. I would bet anyone here who wants to take the bet that probably about 10 out of those 31 are members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Okay? And that is, unfortunately, to my deep sorrow, that's how it is going on. To a black friend who is active in the American black Muslim community, I told him that it is an obscenity that he belongs to that movement, because the Muslims were the ones who castrated the blacks that they took out of Africa to the Arab and Persian and Turkish countries of the Middle East.
You said at the beginning.
Chaim, and then afterwards Professor Schmolzen.
You said at the beginning that this is a model of how Jews relate to other ethnic groups. What can be the Hispano group now, which is growing both in numbers and influence? And to add to the former question is the blacks and the Muslim war.
Yeah, and the third question, Shmuel, in this round.
Two questions. My first question is, first of all, I want to congratulate you. I think it was very promising, very informative. My first question is, there is, I think, a tendency by Jews always to divide somehow competition with other group into what you call intergroup relations with anti-Semitism. And you also, I think, did not escape the trap. In other words, what I'm saying is not every hatred of Jews is anti-Semitism. I mean, so it's a very legitimate one, not because I say, well, it's a good anti-Semite, one who hates Jews more than they deserve. But I'm saying is that if I look at, for instance, in your data about the blacks becoming more educated, you understand that the bad things that are done to your community, and you become more competitive, and so on. So this is, I would say, something very, very understandable, because we don't differentiate between real anti-Semitism, which is something which exists, and I don't deny it, and just inter-group relations which are competitive. And I think that many of the